The city was cold that evening, the streets slick with rain that gleamed under the flickering street lamps. In the heart of the bustling financial district, a man in a tailored suit stood outside a high-rise hospital, his breath visible in the chilly air. His name was Richard Harland, a billionaire known for his ruthless business deals and sharp mind, but tonight, none of that mattered. His world had shrunk to a single room inside, where his daughter, Emily, lay motionless, unable to move her legs after a sudden accident. Richard's eyes were red from sleepless nights filled with worry and silent prayers. As he lit a cigarette, the smoke mingling with the cold mist, a soft voice cut through the noise of the city. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Richard turned sharply. Before him stood a boy, no older than 16, dressed in tattered clothes, his face streaked with dirt but calm and steady. The boy's eyes held a strange certainty that unsettled Richard more than the cold. "Who are you?" Richard demanded, masking his shock with a tone of authority. The boy smiled faintly and said nothing more. Instead, he stepped closer and repeated, "I can help her. But you have to trust me." Richard's pride flared. How could this homeless kid possibly know about his daughter? How could he make such a claim? The cynicism and anger in Richard's heart rose quickly, but beneath it, something fragile and desperate stirred. He looked down the boy's face, searching for a sign of trickery, a scam, anything. There was none. Only a calm promise in those eyes. Richard's hand trembled as he took a long drag of his cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the dark. A voice in his head whispered hope, a feeling he had pushed away for weeks. Yet, a warning rang louder. The world had taught him not to trust strangers, especially not the homeless. But the boy's words echoed again, clearer than before. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Suddenly, Richard felt the weight of his loneliness, the fear of losing his little girl forever, and the crushing failure of all the doctors and money he had thrown at her care. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of possibility. The crowd around them hurried past, indifferent to the quiet exchange, but for Richard, time slowed. The boy was no longer just a homeless kid. He was a chance, a mystery, and maybe the last hope he had. Richard nodded slowly, the steel in his voice softening. "All right. Tell me what you want." The boy's smile widened, and in that moment, the world shifted. A silent pact was made beneath the streetlights, where desperation met faith, and the impossible began to feel real. Richard Harland was no stranger to pain. The years of building his empire had come with sacrifices, but nothing had prepared him for the silence that filled his home when Emily stopped walking. Emily was not just his daughter. She was the light that had once pulled him back from the edge of darkness. Before the accident, she had been a bright girl full of laughter and dreams, a skilled dancer with a passion that lit up every room she entered. But that night changed everything. A reckless driver had shattered not only Emily's legs but Richard's heart. The doctors spoke in cold tones about paralysis, irreversible damage, and endless therapy. Richard had spent millions on the best specialists, the newest treatments, and experimental surgeries. None had worked. Emily's world shrank to a bed, and Richard's world became a cage of guilt and frustration. At the same time, across the city, the homeless boy lived a life hidden from the eyes of society. His name was Eli, though few knew it. He had been on the streets since he was a child, moving from shelter to shelter, avoiding the traps of the cold world. What people saw was a ragged boy with no future, but Eli carried a secret deeper than most could imagine. He had learned healing arts from a distant relative, a healer who believed in the power of the body and spirit to mend what seemed broken. Eli's past was clouded in mystery. Rumors whispered he had once belonged to a family of great wealth, but something had torn him away, leaving him lost and forgotten. Despite the harshness of life on the streets, Eli had a calmness that drew people to him. He had healed stray animals, comforted lost souls, and listened to the pain no one else wanted to hear. When Eli heard about Emily, a girl who couldn't walk, something inside him stirred. He felt a pull, a call he couldn't ignore. He had to find her. The moment he saw Richard outside the hospital, his heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and hope. He knew his chance had come, not just to help a child but to reclaim a part of himself that had been buried beneath years of hardship. For Richard, this meeting with Eli was a crack in the armor of his controlled life. The rigid businessman was forced to confront the raw emotions he had buried for too long, hope, fear, desperation, and the desperate need for a miracle. Neither man understood yet how deeply their lives would intertwine. Richard's hardened mind and Eli's hidden knowledge were about to collide in a story that challenged everything science, society, and even faith could explain. They were both broken in different ways, each carrying scars invisible to the outside world. Yet, in their brokenness, there was a fragile promise, a chance that healing might come from the most unexpected place and person. As the rain continued to fall softly on the city streets, the two men stood silently, each wrestling with their past and what the future might hold. It was the beginning of a journey neither could have foreseen, where trust would be the most dangerous and valuable currency. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beep of machines and the faint rustling of sheets. Emily lay still, her eyes tracing the shadows on the ceiling, her legs motionless and cold. Richard sat by her side, his fingers gripping hers tightly, hoping for a sign that the nightmare would end. Then Eli arrived. The boy walked into the room without hesitation, his presence calm yet electric. He did not introduce himself formally. Instead, he knelt beside Emily and placed his hands gently on her knees. Richard watched, heart pounding, as Eli closed his eyes and whispered words that sounded like a prayer but were neither entirely religious nor scientific. Time seemed to bend. At first, nothing happened. Richard's disbelief grew stronger, his mind racing to dismiss this as a cruel joke or desperate fantasy. But then, a faint twitch, barely noticeable, stirred in Emily's right foot. Richard's breath caught, hope fighting with fear. Eli kept his hands steady, murmuring softly. Minutes passed, and Emily's toes flexed again. The impossible was starting to take shape. But then Eli looked up at Richard with serious eyes and said, "This will not be easy. Healing is a path, not a quick fix. You must trust me, even when it feels wrong." Richard's mind flooded with questions. What did the boy mean? What would he ask in return? Desperation silenced his doubts for a moment. He nodded, swallowing his pride. "Do whatever it takes." Eli's next words came quietly but firmly. "There will be pain and tests, not all from the body. You will be challenged." The air thickened with tension. Richard realized this was more than just healing a body. It was about healing broken trust, shattered beliefs, and maybe even himself. The hospital staff grew suspicious. Nurses whispered about the strange boy who entered without permission and the billionaire who seemed entranced. Rumors began to spread. Was this a con? A miracle? The media caught wind quickly. Headlines appeared, questioning Richard's state of mind and Eli's true intentions. Powerful people, Richard's associates and rivals, watched closely, some eager to see the billionaire fall for a scam, others fearing the implications of a miracle. Meanwhile, Eli began a healing process that defied conventional medicine. He worked in silence, guiding Emily through slow movements, breathing exercises, and gentle encouragement. Days turned into weeks. Emily's muscles, long unused, began to respond. The paralysis started to give way, but the process was grueling. Richard's nights were filled with doubt. Was this boy truly a healer or just a child playing with hope? Eli's methods challenged everything Richard believed. No machines, no pills, only patience and faith in the body's hidden strength. At times, Richard wanted to give up, to return to the cold certainty of doctors and hospitals. But every tiny sign of progress held him fast. The moment when Emily lifted her leg for the first time on her own was a silent victory that shook Richard to his core. But healing came with costs. Strange things began to happen, unexplained sensations, fleeting shadows in the corners of Richard's vision, whispered warnings from people who feared what Eli represented. The healing stirred more than just Emily's body. It stirred old wounds and enemies lurking in the background. Richard faced a moral crossroads. Should he protect his daughter and continue the risky path Eli offered, or return to the safety of science and abandon hope? Eli's presence was a challenge, not just to Emily's condition but to Richard's world and soul. The choice was no longer simple. The inciting incident was not just the offer of healing but the test of faith that came with it, a gamble with everything Richard held dear. Days blurred into nights as the slow work of healing stretched on. Eli stayed close to Emily, guiding her every movement with quiet patience. Each morning, Richard arrived at the hospital with a mixture of hope and dread, waiting to see if his daughter could move just a little more than before. The boy's methods were simple but strange. No machines, no drugs, just hands, words, and trust. Emily's muscles twitched and strengthened, but the process was exhausting and painful. Every small step forward seemed matched by moments of fear and doubt. Richard's business empire was starting to feel the strain of his absence. Board members whispered behind his back, and competitors circled like vultures. The pressure mounted, but nothing was more intense than the battles inside Richard's own mind. Could he really believe in a homeless boy's promise? His years of rational thinking screamed no, but his heart refused to give up. Worse still, rumors about Eli began to spread. Some said the boy was a fraud, a trickster preying on a desperate father. Others whispered darker things, that Eli's healing came at a terrible price, that forces beyond understanding were involved. Richard found himself caught between worlds, the clinical reality of medicine and the uncertain mystery of faith and miracle. The hospital staff grew divided, with some supporting Eli's presence and others demanding his removal. Security watched Eli like a threat. One evening, Richard confronted Eli in the quiet corridor outside Emily's room. "You have to tell me the truth," he said quietly. "What is this? Where did you learn to do this?" Eli looked at Richard steadily, his eyes calm but filled with a weight too heavy for his age. "Healing is not just about fixing bodies," he said. "It is about healing what is broken inside, even the parts you cannot see." Richard's brow furrowed. "But why me? Why my daughter?" Eli hesitated, then whispered, "Because she needs more than healing. She needs hope, and so do you." That night, Richard's world shifted. He began to see the cracks in his own life, the distance from his family, the loneliness behind his wealth, the fear that had kept him trapped in control. As Emily's strength grew, so did the danger. A powerful man in Richard's circle learned about Eli and saw a threat. He sent warnings, cryptic messages and veiled threats to make Richard stop trusting the boy. At the same time, the media frenzy exploded. Headlines questioned Richard's sanity, and Eli's mysterious past became fodder for speculation. The pressure was relentless. Richard stood at a crossroads, to protect his daughter and believe in Eli, risking his reputation and safety, or to surrender to the fear and return to the sterile world of hospitals and medicine. The choice was a moral battlefield. Eli's healing was not just physical. It challenged everything Richard had built his life on. It demanded trust he was not sure he could give and courage he thought he lost. Yet, beneath the fear, a quiet truth blossomed. Sometimes healing meant letting go of control and opening the heart to the unknown. As Emily took her first unsteady steps with Eli's help, Richard felt the weight of the impossible lifting, but the cost was clear. The road ahead was uncertain, full of shadows and trials. And in that uncertainty lay the true test of faith, love, and sacrifice. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the hospital windows as Richard paced in his private office. Every step echoed with the weight of questions that haunted him. The progress with Emily was undeniable, but something about Eli remained a mystery too deep to ignore. One evening, Richard found himself drawn back to the old neighborhood where Eli had first appeared. A place far removed from the polished world of wealth and power. He followed whispers and rumors to a small, run-down house at the edge of the city. Inside, an elderly woman sat quietly, her eyes sharp and kind. When Richard mentioned Eli's name, her face softened, and she began to speak softly about a boy who had once been part of a family much like Richard's, lost and broken, then cast out by tragedy. The woman revealed that Eli was not just a homeless child, but the grandson of a healer who had long ago disappeared after a family scandal. This healer had passed down secret knowledge, blending old traditions with a gift for mending bodies and spirits. The revelation hit Richard hard. Eli was connected to a world he had never known, a world of healing that existed outside of medicine and money. But more than that, Richard learned something even more shocking. Eli's family history was tied to his own. A hidden bond, a past betrayal, and a secret that explained why Eli had appeared in his life just when hope was fading. Richard's mind reeled. The homeless boy who claimed he could make his daughter walk again was not just a stranger asking for trust. He was family. A part of Richard's own bloodline, cast away but returned in the moment of greatest need. The pieces fell into place, The healing, the knowledge, the timing. Eli's presence was not coincidence but fate. At the same time, Emily's recovery accelerated. Her first steps without help were small but powerful, a symbol of the impossible becoming real. But with every step forward, Richard felt the weight of what had been hidden. Eli's healing was tied to more than just medicine. It was tied to forgiveness, redemption, and a reckoning that reached far beyond the hospital walls. Richard realized that the road to healing was also a path to confront the mistakes and secrets that had long divided his family. Trusting Eli meant facing the pain buried deep in his own past. It meant accepting that healing was not just physical but emotional and spiritual. The twist revealed that this journey was as much about repairing broken relationships as it was about curing paralysis. Richard's heart ached with the complexity of it all, the loss, the hope, and the fragile chance for something new. Eli's role was no longer just healer but a bridge to a past Richard had tried to forget. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the city, Richard stood at the edge of a new understanding. His daughter's steps were not just a miracle of the body but a sign that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. But the question remained, would Richard be strong enough to face the truths that Eli's presence demanded? The revelation changed everything and opened a door to a future uncertain, but filled with the possibility of grace and renewal. The hospital room was quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It was filled with a sense of hope and something unspoken, a calm after the storm of emotions and battles fought in the shadows. Emily stood in the center, her legs strong enough to hold her weight, but her eyes told a story of pain, courage, and the slow journey toward healing. Richard watched her, his heart swelling with pride and a deep sadness he couldn't shake. The miracle of her walking again was real, but it came at a cost far beyond what anyone could see. Eli, the boy who had changed everything, was nowhere to be found. One morning, Richard went to the hospital room, only to learn that Eli had left quietly during the night. No note, no explanation, just a vanished presence that left behind questions and a strange emptiness. Richard felt the sting of loss again, but this time it was mixed with gratitude. Eli had been more than a healer, he was a teacher, a bridge to a part of Richard's life he had long ignored. As Richard reflected on the past weeks, he realized that the healing was not just about Emily's body but about healing himself, his family, and the broken pieces of trust and love that had been lost over the years. The relationships that had frayed under the weight of grief and pride were now beginning to mend. Friends and family slowly returned, drawn by the story of hope and the quiet changes in Richard's heart. The media buzz faded, replaced by a deeper understanding that some things could not be explained by science or money alone. There were still unanswered questions. Who exactly was Eli? Where had he gone? And what was the true nature of the healing he offered? Richard knew these questions might never be fully answered. Some mysteries were meant to remain that way, fragments of a larger story that stretched beyond human understanding. In the quiet moments, Richard found himself thinking about Eli's words, the idea that healing was about more than bodies, that it was about the spirit and heart. He felt a call to live differently, to embrace humility and faith in ways he had never allowed himself before. The millionaire who once ruled with certainty was now a man open to wonder and change. Emily's steps were a symbol, not just of recovery but of new beginnings. They reminded Richard that life was fragile and beautiful, full of surprises that could come from the most unexpected places and people. As the hospital lights dimmed for the night, Richard stood by the window, looking out over the city that had witnessed his greatest pain and his greatest hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it, with an open heart and the memory of a homeless boy who had made his daughter walk again.